Record. Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Runnels, and I have the honor and privilege of being your anatomy and physiology professor for the next 8 weeks. Thank you so much for being here, and you'll see me very often talking you through all the anatomy and physiology lecture material. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So, chapter 1 has been divided into two parts, part A and part B, and we're going to go over part A today. Okay, so first and foremost, like anatomy is the study of the structure of body parts and their relationship to one another, and physiology is how those body parts function. So your anatomy would be like the brain, the heart, the liver, and then the physiology would be how does the brain work? How does the liver work? How does the heart actually pump blood throughout the body? And so those are like the two big, large subdivisions of anatomy and physiology. So anatomy specifically in itself has some subdivisions. It has a gross, it has microscopic, and has developmental. So gross is just your large visible structures. Microscopic is what you can see underneath the microscope. So the study of cells is cytology, and the study of tissues is histology. And then studying how like an embryo develops from the womb to birth, that's the study of embryology. Okay. And then for physiology, its own subdivisions are more so systems based. So, like the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, things like that. Okay. With anatomy and physiology, you have to remember that the structure determines the function. Like that's the principle of the complementarity of structure and function. Like what it looks like determines what it does. Okay, so let's move on to the structural organization or the levels of organization in biology. A lot of this stuff in chapters 1 through 4 would be a review from biology, and we're just tying in a couple of anatomy and physiology concepts in it. So if it sounds kind of familiar, that's why, because the first several chapters is more of a refresher on what you should have learned in biology and some parts of chemistry. Okay, so the levels of organization, your very smallest level is the chemical level, so your atoms that combine to become molecules, and then the molecules become organelles, and then your organelles make up the cell, and that makes up your cellular structure. And when you have a group of cells that do the same thing, that becomes your tissue. When you have a group of tissues that do the same thing, that becomes your organ. And then when you have several organs working together for a specific goal, that becomes organ system. So cardiovascular system, respiratory system, nervous system. And then when you put all of the organ systems together, you have an organism. Okay, so there are some necessary life functions. In order for organisms to survive, they have to maintain boundaries, they need to move, they need to be responsive, need to be able to digest their food products. They have to go through metabolism, excretion, reproduction, and growth. So, with maintaining boundaries, basically you're separating from your internal and external environments, and you have to be able to coexist as well as maintain a homeostatic range within your own environment, the organism's own body system. For movement, it has to be able to move. So can it contract? Can it relax its muscles? Or how is it getting around? Like that's something that is necessary for life functions. You have to be able to move. Has to be responsive. So the organism has to be able to respond to stimuli. Organism has to be able to ingest its foodstuffs, its food products, has to be able to metabolize that food that it just digested, and it has to be able to get rid of that food, which is excretion, so that it doesn't build up and become toxic within itself. And then the organism needs to be able to reproduce. You want to continue on with your species, so you have to be able to reproduce. And then once you reproduce, the organism, that the offspring has to be able to grow. Okay, so there are 11 organ systems within the body that work together. Specific that work together. So talking about the human: integumentary, skeletal, muscular, endocrine, respiratory, urinary, which from time to time you'll hear me say excretory. I use those interchangeably. Reproductive system, that includes the male and female reproductive system. You also have your nervous system, your digestive system, as well as cardiovascular, which I will sometimes say circulatory system. I use those interchangeably. And then finally, the lymphatic system. We'll go over all those systems more in depth later on in the semester or in this 8 weeks. And then some of these systems are actually not mentioned in A&P 1. That's something you get to in A&P 2. Okay. So humans need several factors for survival. And we need nutrients, we need oxygen, definitely need water, the universal solvent or the solvent of life. We have to maintain a normal body temperature, and it has to be, we have to have an appropriate atmospheric pressure for us to survive. We have to have a specific amount of nutrients. We have to have our carbs. We have to have our proteins. We have to have our fats. All right. Carbohydrates are a major source of energy. I know there's like some people who are like, oh no, don't eat carbs because of something, trying to lose weight and everything, but you do need carbs. It is one source of energy for you. We also need oxygen so we can breathe and get those nutrients to our bodies. We need water to help with fluids and excretions and secretions within our bodies. We also need the water because we're about 70% water. So we definitely need water in order to survive. We need to maintain a normal body temperature, which is 37 degrees Celsius, which is around 98.4, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we have to live in a space with the appropriate atmospheric pressure. So homeostasis is basically how the body maintains an internal condition, which is stable or within a specific range for that human to operate efficiently. What happens is you have your stimulus, and that produces change within, produces a change in a variable. And then, and that variable could be like blood sugar, body temperature, blood volume. And then you have your receptor that detects that change within your body. And it's monitoring that change. And after it senses a change, it's communicated to the control center. That determines if that change is still within that set point or is it outside of that set point. And then depending on what that change is and if it's in or outside that set point, you have an effector that receives the output from the control center. So the control center tells the effector what to do. And the effector response is this going to be a negative feedback where we're trying to get your homeostatic range in that regard back to normal, or is this a positive feedback response where we're trying to enhance that stimulus or whatever is going on? And then you, fifth stage, you have your response. So what the output is. Okay, so negative feedback, which I mentioned earlier, negative feedback is like the most common feedback mechanism that's used within the body. And this helps to regulate like body temperature. This can help regulate your blood glucose levels with insulin. This can also help regulate several other things. And so with negative feedback, it's like this. Your body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. If you go outside and it's hot, so, Texas heat, Texas heat will come through. If you go outside, you begin to sweat. The reason why you're sweating is because your body temperature has increased from 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit to above that homeostatic range. And so your body begins to sweat in order to bring your body temperature back down to homeostatic range or as close to it as possible. Okay, and it's the same effect if you are now coming outside back inside where it's cooler, and then it's a little too cold, then your body responds to that stimulus. Your body temperature has dropped from 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit to something below that homeostatic range, and so then your body starts to shiver in order to generate heat to hopefully bring your body temperature back up to 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's negative feedback, where we're just your homeostatic range is within here, but then something happens, a stimulus happens where it takes you outside of that range, and then your body is just trying to get you back within that range. So that's negative feedback, and that explains everything that I just said. Positive feedback is different. Positive feedback is something where it exaggerates that original stimulus. And the two big examples that we see this in is with labor contractions by oxytocin, where it increases labor contractions so that the woman pushes out the baby. And we also see that with the platelet plug formation and blood clotting. And so what happens when we're talking about platelet plugs and blood clotting, you have a break or tear that occurs in the blood vessel of the blood vessel wall, right? And that then your positive feedback cell cycle is initiated. Platelets adhere to that site and release chemicals, and those chemicals communicate like, we have a tear in the blood vessel, I need backup. And so more chemicals are released and it attracts more platelets, and so the whole thing, it keeps doing this cycle until you plug up that tear and it doesn't leak out any blood anymore. So that's a platelet plug. And that's an example of positive feedback. Okay. If there is an imbalance with the homeostatic or homeostasis within one's body, it can lead to a situation that cannot be repaired internally, and then it needs medical intervention. So, example that would be like heart failure. That would be like a homeostatic imbalance, where you would need something else to help regulate an issue that's going on within the body because it couldn't do it itself. Okay, that is part A of chapter 1. I will see you in part B of chapter 1.